Sophia's fingers scraped blood across the dashboard as she clawed at the locked door. Her left eye was swollen shut. The steering wheel had crushed into her ribs, and through the cracked windshield, she could see the taillights of the car that had forced her off the road getting smaller, disappearing into the rain, leaving her for dead on a highway where no one was supposed to find her. She had seen the files, she had read the names, and now someone powerful enough to make a person vanish had decided she needed to vanish too. If this story already has your heart racing, hit that subscribe button right now, turn on your notifications, and follow every single part of Sophia's story until the very end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's go. The rain had been falling for 3 hours before Sophia Bennett realized she wasn't going to survive the night. Not because of the crash, not because of the blood running down the side of her face, or the door that wouldn't open no matter how many times she threw her shoulder into it, but because she understood with absolute certainty that the person who had put her here was watching the road from somewhere out in that darkness, making sure she didn't climb out. She had been driving home from her second consecutive 12-hour shift at St. Matthew's Hospital. That was the kind of life Sophia lived. 12-hour shifts, cold coffee from the break room, shoes that never fully dried between one shift and the next. She was 27 years old, and she had spent the last 3 years pouring everything she had into emergency medicine, into strangers who arrived bleeding unconscious, terrified, and broke. She never complained about that. She had chosen it. She believed in it. But tonight, the highway outside the city had turned into something she hadn't chosen at all. She remembered the moment clearly. She had been maybe 12 miles from her apartment when she noticed the headlights. They had appeared behind her the way headlights always did. Just another car, just another pair of lights in the rain. But these lights didn't keep a normal distance. They crept closer, stayed closer. And when Sophia slowed down to let the car pass, the lights didn't move around her. They stayed exactly where they were, right behind her, close enough to make her nervous. She had pressed the accelerator slightly. Not dramatically, just enough to create space. And the headlights did the same thing. Kept up, closed the gap again. That was when the feeling started. Not full panic. Not yet. Just that low, quiet warning that every woman knows, the one that starts somewhere in the chest before the brain has caught up. Something is wrong. She had reached for her phone. She had been about to call her colleague Marcus, not because she had anything specific to say, but because she wanted another voice in the car with her. She wanted to feel less alone on that road. She never finished dialing. The vehicle behind her accelerated, not to pass, not to follow more closely, but to slam directly into the rear of her car, with a force that snapped her head backward and sent her car fishtailing across the wet asphalt. She screamed. She fought the wheel. For 3 terrifying seconds, she almost held it. Then the second impact came. That one sent her car off the highway entirely through a wooden guardrail that shattered like it was made of paper, and down a short embankment into an abandoned rest stop that hadn't seen regular traffic in years. The car hit a concrete barrier at the bottom. And then it stopped. And then everything was quiet except for the rain. Sophia didn't lose consciousness immediately. That was almost worse, being awake through those first minutes, understanding exactly what had happened, understanding that her car was destroyed and her phone had been thrown somewhere in the collision, and that the road above her was empty and dark, and that whoever had hit her had driven away without stopping. She tried the doors first. The driver's door was crushed from the impact with the barrier and wouldn't move. She reached across the center console for the passenger door. It opened 2 inches and then stopped, blocked by something outside. She couldn't see what. She couldn't open it more than that. Her seatbelt had locked during the crash. She pressed the release button. Nothing. She pressed it again harder. Still nothing. Her ribs hurt badly enough that deep breathing was becoming a problem. She started going through what she had. A medical brain doesn't stop working just because it's the one in danger. If anything, it gets more precise. She had been wearing her hospital scrubs under her jacket. She had no phone. She had a small pen light clipped to her jacket pocket. She found it, clicked it on, used it to check her own eyes in the rearview mirror, checking her pupils because she needed to know if she had a concussion serious enough to be dangerous. Pupils were uneven, left larger than right. That was not good. She clicked the pen light off and pressed it against her palm and tried to think. Nobody knew she had left the hospital. Marcus had already gone home. Her supervisor, Dr. Ellison, had waved her off 2 hours ago. Her apartment building had a night doorman who wouldn't start worrying until morning. Her shift didn't start again until 7 the next evening. That meant she had hours to wait before anyone would even notice she hadn't arrived somewhere she was expected. And she was in an embankment below a highway in a rest stop that wasn't on any route anyone used in the rain, with a seatbelt that wouldn't release and a door that wouldn't open, and a head injury she couldn't assess properly on herself. She allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of fear. She counted them because she had learned in emergency medicine that fear served a purpose only for a short window. After 30 seconds, it became noise. She breathed through the 30 seconds, let them pass, and then she did the only thing that made sense. She started working the problem. The pen light had a small metal clip on the side. Sophia used the edge of it to work at the seatbelt release mechanism for nearly 10 minutes before she accepted that it wasn't going to open from that angle. She tried the rear-view mirror next. If she could get it free from its mounting, the metal base might be strong enough to help with the window. But the mirror held. She used her elbow on the driver's side window safety glass. It shattered into a pattern of thousands of small cubes instead of sharp shards, but it didn't fully clear from the frame, and the frame itself was bent badly enough that pushing through it would mean cutting herself deeply. She was doing the math on that, deciding whether it was worth the blood loss when she heard something outside. She went still. There were footsteps. Careful footsteps moving slowly across the wet gravel of the old rest stop. Her first thought was immediate and cold. They came back. She pressed herself against the back of her seat. An instinct pointless. She knew it was pointless, but her body made the decision before her mind could override it. She clicked the pen light off. She held her breath. The footsteps stopped directly beside the driver's side window, and then a voice said quietly through the rain, "Is someone in there?" She didn't answer. The voice tried again. "I'm not going to hurt you. I saw the guardrail on the road above. I stopped." Sophia still didn't answer. She had just been put here by someone who hadn't hesitated to ram her car off a highway. She wasn't going to take the first voice that appeared in the dark at face value. "I can hear you breathing," the voice said. "Your window is broken. I'm going to take out my phone and use the flashlight so you can see me." "Okay." A light appeared. It pointed upward first at the man's own face. Not at her. At his own face so she could see him. He was tall. Dark hair plastered down from the rain. A jaw that had been broken at some point and healed slightly crooked. Dark eyes that were scanning the damage to the car with an expression she recognized. She had seen it on paramedics, on surgeons in bad situations. Not fear. Assessment. He moved the light slowly, carefully toward the window. "The frame is bent," he said. "The door won't open that way. I need to break more of the window out and pull you through. But I can see you're injured, and I don't want to do that without telling you first." She studied him for another 4 seconds. "I'm a nurse," she said. "I have a possible concussion and I think 2 cracked ribs. Be careful pulling me through. If you twist me wrong, it could make the rib situation worse." Something shifted in his expression. She wasn't sure what it was. It might have been surprise. Okay, he said. "Tell me if I'm doing it wrong." He took off his jacket and folded it over the window frame to cover the remaining glass. He worked efficiently and without hesitation. He found the seatbelt mechanism from outside the car, reached through and freed it. In under a minute, she hadn't been able to do that from inside because the angle was wrong. Then he reached both arms through, positioned his hands carefully under her arms, the way someone trained in this would, and said, "Breathe out and lean toward me. Don't brace your chest." She did exactly what he said. He pulled her through the window. The pain from her ribs was significant enough that she bit down hard to keep from making a sound. But she was out. She was standing in the rain on the gravel of the old rest stop, and she was outside the car, and she was breathing. She looked at the man who had pulled her out. "You didn't call 911, she said. "Neither did you," he replied. It was a strange thing to notice. But she was right, he hadn't called for help. He hadn't announced his presence loudly or shown lights toward the road to signal other passing cars. He had come down quietly and alone. "Who are you?" she asked. The question sat in the rain between them for a moment. Alexander Romano, he said. Sophia went very still. She knew that name. Every person in New York knew that name. But she knew it in a specific way, the way a person knows a name that appeared on documents they were never supposed to find. She did not let him see her reaction. She was good at that. 3 years of emergency medicine had trained her face to stay neutral when her mind was screaming. She had delivered the worst news of people's lives with a steady voice and steady eyes. She could do the same now. "My car isn't drivable," she said, "and I need medical attention." "I know," Alexander Romano said. "My car is at the top of the embankment. Can you walk?" She tested her legs. Everything below the waist was functioning, if unhappy about it. "Yes." "Then let's go." She followed him. She watched him move ahead of her on the wet gravel, the way he moved, the way he scanned the environment around them automatically, the way he had noted the crushed guardrail from above and recognized immediately that something deliberate had happened. These were not the instincts of someone who lived a casual life. His car at the top of the embankment was a black SUV. Unmarked, private plates. 2 men were standing outside it, both large, both scanning the highway in both directions, with the focused attention of professionals. Neither of them seemed surprised that their employer had come up from an embankment carrying an injured woman. That told her something. She stopped walking. "Wait," she said. Alexander turned. "Who are those men?" "My security detail." "I'm not getting in that car," she said. "Not until I understand what's happening." He met her eyes. The rain was soaking through what was left of his shirt. He had put his jacket under her on the way through the window frame. He didn't look cold. He didn't look impatient. He looked at her the way someone looks at a situation they're choosing to take seriously. "Someone forced your car off this highway," he said. "That guardrail didn't just break. The angle of your car at the bottom of that embankment tells me you were hit from behind at significant speed, and then hit again on the driver's side to send you down there specifically. That's not an accident. That's someone who knew what they were doing." Sophia said nothing. "And you," he continued, "are standing here in the rain with 2 cracked ribs and a head injury, and your first instinct isn't to call for help. Which tells me you already know why someone would want to put you in that embankment." She looked at him for a long moment. "You saved my life," she said finally. "That doesn't mean I trust you." "It doesn't have to," Alexander Romano said. "But you need medical attention, and you're not going to call 911, so let's agree on something practical for now and argue about the rest later." She hated that it was logical. She got in the car. They drove in silence for a while. Not toward the city, she noticed that immediately. Away from the highway onto narrower roads in a direction she didn't fully recognize. One of the security men drove. The other sat in the front passenger seat. Alexander Romano sat in the back with her, and he did not speak, and he did not watch her constantly, the way someone controlling a situation would. He looked out the window. He let her be. There was a first aid kit in the back of the car, a serious one, not the plastic box of bandages most people kept. Medical grade. She found it without asking, and started working on the cut above her eye, because the blood had started drying, and that was a problem. She cleaned it, and pressed gauze against it, and used 2 of the butterfly closures to pull it shut. Alexander watched her do this. "You're good at that," he said. "I do it 40 times a week," she replied, "usually on other people." He was quiet again for a moment. Then, "What kind of nurse works in emergency medicine for 3 years and never gets used to being told to go home?" She looked at him. "How do you know I have trouble going home? You said you were coming from a shift. You had dried coffee on the back of your hand and the kind of tired that isn't from one shift. That's accumulated tired. That's someone who doesn't stop working until they're physically forced to." She looked down at her hand. The coffee. She hadn't even noticed. "And you," she said, "are someone who drives on empty highways at night and recognizes the difference between an accident and an attack in under 30 seconds. What kind of man does that?" He smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. "The kind who has seen both," he said. They arrived at a building she didn't know. Large setback from a private road, clearly residential, but on a scale that communicated a particular kind of wealth. Not flashy. Not the kind of place designed to impress. The kind of place designed to be invisible. Inside, a woman was waiting. Middle-aged, composed, wearing clothes that suggested medical training without announcing it. She examined Sophia with the thoroughness of a professional and confirmed the rib assessment. 2 cracked, none broken. Painful but manageable. The concussion was mild. She would need rest and monitoring, but she was not in immediate danger. When the woman was done, she left without a word. Sophia was sitting in a chair in a room she hadn't been given a tour of, in a house she hadn't been invited to, and Alexander Romano was standing by the window across from her. "You knew my name when I said it," he said. It wasn't a question. "Most people in New York know your name," she said. "Most people in New York look afraid when they say it," he replied. "You didn't." She met his eyes. "Should I be?" "That depends on who's asking." She exhaled. "I'm an emergency nurse. I've held people's hands while they died. I've been screamed at by people in the worst moments of their lives. I've worked 3 consecutive shifts on nothing but coffee, and the knowledge that if I leave, someone else doesn't get treated. Fear is a resource. I don't waste it on the wrong things." For the first time, something in his expression changed. Not the controlled, assessing look he had been wearing since he pulled her out of the car. Something more genuine than that. "What are the right things?" he asked. She looked at him steadily. "Whoever hit my car and left me there to die. That's the right thing to be afraid of." He nodded slowly. "Then we have that in common tonight." "Do we?" "Someone used a level of force tonight that tells me they wanted certainty," he said. "They didn't follow you and frighten you. They ran you off a highway and left you in a location where you might not be found until morning. That's not a warning. That's an execution that didn't fully work." "I'm aware," she said quietly. "Which means I need to understand why," he said. "Because the highway you were on tonight is in a corridor my organization monitors. Whoever moved on you did it in a place they knew we watch. That's either someone extremely bold or someone who knew exactly what they were doing and why they could get away with it." He crossed the room and sat down across from her. The space between them was small. His eyes were direct. "So I need you to tell me," he said. "What did you find?" Sophia looked at him for a long time. The files came back to her, the ones she had found 6 weeks ago, buried in an administrative system she should never have had access to. The patient names that didn't match the records. The treatment that had been documented but never billed. The injuries that matched patterns she recognized from her training, the kind that appeared when violence had been systematic and professionally applied. And the authorization codes that ran through all of it. Codes she had traced carefully late at night alone in the documentation room to a financial structure she didn't fully understand, but recognized as deliberate. She had been going to report it. She had been deciding who to trust. She had been moving carefully because she understood that whoever had constructed that system had done so with enough sophistication that a wrong move would destroy the evidence before it reached anyone who could act on it. And now she was sitting across from Alexander Romano, and he was asking her what she had found, and she knew she absolutely knew that what she had found traced back to a name she had seen attached to those authorization codes. Romano. She looked at him. "You saved my life tonight," she said. "But I'm not going to answer that question yet." He didn't look angry. He looked of all things like he respected it. "Why not?" he asked. "Because I don't know yet whether you're part of the problem or not," she said. "And until I do, telling you what I know either keeps me alive or makes me more dangerous to someone. I'm not in a position to take that risk without more information." The silence between them was long. "That's fair," Alexander Romano said. And that was what surprised her most, not the violence of the crash, not the scale of the house, not the name that had made everyone in New York flinch for 20 years. The fact that the most feared man in the city looked at her directness and said it was fair. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in a room she'd been given locked from the inside. She checked, and she went through everything she knew with the precise, exhausted discipline of someone who treated a crisis the way she treated a trauma case. Methodical. Sequenced. No wasted motion. She had found the first irregularity 6 weeks ago. It had been an accident. She had been cross-referencing patient arrival records against supply usage because they had a billing problem in the department, a routine administrative task. She had pulled up a record and found that the name on the patient file didn't match the name on the biometric entry log. It was a small discrepancy, the kind that could have been a clerical error. But she had been trained by 3 years of emergency medicine to notice things that didn't fit. The human body didn't lie, and neither did the small details. The wrong lab value, the wrong timing, the symptom that didn't match the story. She noticed discrepancies. It was automatic. She pulled the patient file further. She found that it was connected to 4 other files, all arriving within a 6-month window, all under names that had the same quality of not quite fitting. The billing addresses were commercial properties. The listed emergency contacts were phone numbers that when she tried one quietly rang without connecting. She should have stopped there. She knew that. She should have flagged it to administration and let someone else pull on the thread. But the injuries in those files had stopped her cold, because she recognized them. She had worked a rotation in a hospital near a territory that had experienced significant gang violence 18 months earlier. She had seen what systematic professional violence did to a body when it was applied with enough knowledge to hurt without killing. There was a particular pattern to it, the locations, the severity, the careful avoidance of organs. These patients had those injuries. These patients had been hurt that way deliberately. And then they had been brought to St. Matthew's under false names and treated quietly and discharged to addresses that didn't exist. It wasn't the hospital doing something wrong. The emergency department had treated them in good faith, recording what they were given. Someone else had managed the intake. Someone with access to the administrative system above the emergency department level. That was when she started going further than she should have. She spent 3 nights in the documentation room. She was careful. She covered her access with routine queries, mixed in enough normal requests that her activity looked like ordinary administrative work. She built a picture piece by piece, and the picture, when it came together, was something that made her stomach drop. The authorization codes ran to a financial management structure. The structure had a name on it, not a person's name, a corporate name. But the corporate structure, when she followed it through the public filing system, led to a holding company. And the holding company had a registered agent. And the registered agent's name appeared in the files of 2 of her patients. Not as a patient, as a contact. And the contact was identified as representing Romano Consolidated Holdings. She had stared at that for a long time in the empty documentation room at 2 in the morning. Romano. She hadn't known what it meant. She still didn't know entirely what it meant. It might have meant Alexander Romano was orchestrating it. Or it might have meant someone had used his name, his corporate structure, as a layer of cover for something he didn't know about. She hadn't been able to determine which, and she hadn't been able to determine it before someone decided she needed to stop looking. By 5 in the morning, lying in the room in Alexander Romano's house, with her ribs aching and her thoughts running in careful loops, she had arrived at a conclusion she didn't entirely like. She needed more information, and the only person who might have it, or who might be willing to give her access to it, was the man sleeping somewhere in this house, whose name was written across the center of everything she had found. She sat up slowly, pressed her hand against her ribs, and breathed through the pain. She was a woman who had been left for dead on a highway in the rain. She was a woman with cracked ribs and a concussion sitting in the house of the most feared man in the city. She was a woman whose investigation had apparently triggered someone powerful enough to put a professional driver behind a vehicle and run her off a road. And she was, despite all of that, still alive. She sat in that room in the dark and decided something. She was going to stay alive. And to stay alive, she was going to need to understand exactly what Alexander Romano knew and what he didn't. Because either he was her enemy, or someone was using his name to destroy them both. And the difference between those 2 things was the difference between her surviving the next 48 hours or not. She pressed her palm flat against her sternum and breathed carefully. She was still here. She was still thinking. And tomorrow, one way or another, she was going to get her answers. She found him at 6:15 in the morning, not because she had gone looking. She had followed the smell of coffee, because her body had decided that coffee was more important than caution, and her body was probably right. The concussion made everything behind her eyes feel thick and pressurized, and her ribs sent a sharp reminder with every step that she was not a well woman walking through the house of a dangerous one. I was already awake, already dressed, standing at a long table covered in papers and a laptop holding a phone to his ear, speaking in a low voice that stopped the moment she walked in. He looked at her. He ended the call without saying goodbye. "You should be resting," he said. "I've been awake since 3, she said. Resting wasn't working. He said nothing for a moment. Then he moved to the side of the room and poured a second cup of coffee without being asked and set it on the table near her. She sat down. She wrapped both hands around the mug and let the heat move into her fingers. "How are your ribs?" he asked. "Worse than last night," she said. "That's normal. Inflammation peaks around 6 to 8 hours. Is there anything you need?" "Answers," she said. He sat down across from her. Not at the head of the table, not at a position of authority directly across the way. Someone sits when they intend to have an actual conversation rather than conduct one. "Then ask," he said. She studied him for a moment. In the daylight without rain and crisis blurring everything, he looked different than he had on that embankment. Not soft or nothing about Alexander Romano suggested soft, but more detailed. The lines around his eyes were deep. His hands wrapped around his own mug had the kind of stillness that came from decades of learning to control a body that might otherwise give things away. "How long have you been running Romano Consolidated Holdings?" she asked. He didn't react to the name, not visibly, but something behind his eyes sharpened. 14 years, he said. "Why?" "Because that name appears in records connected to my hospital," she said. In a way that it shouldn't. The silence that followed was different from the silences of the previous night. This one had weight in it. He set his coffee mug down slowly. "Show me," he said. "I don't have the records with me," she said. "They're not digital. I printed them and kept them somewhere safe. I wasn't going to carry them." "Smart," he said quietly. "And then, tell me what they said," she told him. "Not everything. Not the deepest layers, not the authorization codes, but the shape of it. The patients with false names, the injuries she recognized, the billing structure that ran through his corporate entity." She watched his face the entire time she spoke the way she watched patients' faces when she was trying to determine if their story matched their body. His jaw tightened. Once. That was all. "You think I ordered this?" he said when she finished. "I think your name is on it," she said. "I don't know yet if that's the same thing." He was quiet for a long moment. "It's not," he said. "Then someone used your structure without your knowledge." "Without my authorization," he corrected. And there was something in the distinction, the precision of it, that told her he was a man who understood the difference between what happened inside his world and what he had sanctioned. "Who has access to Romano Consolidated?" she asked. "3 people," he said. "My attorney, my financial director, and my brother." She watched him say the last word. His brother. She filed that. "You need to look at those records," she said. "I know. And you need to understand something," she said. "Whatever is in those records, I didn't bring it to you. I didn't come to you. You found me on a highway last night. If you had driven a different road, you would have no idea I existed." "I know that too," he said. "So whatever happens next," she said, "I need you to understand that I am not your problem to manage. I am a person who found something, and someone tried to kill me for it, and until I understand whether you're part of that or not, I am not your ally, and I am not your enemy. I'm just someone who is trying to stay alive." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're not afraid of me," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was closer to something that puzzled him. "I already told you," she said. "Fear is a resource. I'm saving mine." "For what?" "For whoever was behind that wheel last night," she said. "Because they're going to try again." High-mod calls after that. She didn't hear all of them. She went back to the room she had been given and changed into clothes that had been left folded on the chair. Clothes that fit well enough to tell her someone had estimated her size accurately and quickly, which was its own kind of information about the organization she was temporarily inside. She moved carefully with the ribs. She thought carefully about everything. When she came back out, Alexander had two men standing near the table who hadn't been there before. Neither of them was security. Their posture was different, more alert, more focused. One carried a laptop. The other had a phone he was scrolling through with the rapid, deliberate attention of someone processing information professionally. "These are people I trust," Alexander said to her. "Dominic and Reyes. They're going to look at the hospital records you described." She looked at the two men. "They're going to look at records I haven't given them." "They're going to look at the hospital's administrative system," Alexander said. "Not through your access, through a different channel." You're going to access St. Matthew's internal system," she said flatly. "We already have," Dominic said. He had a quiet, precise way of speaking that reminded her of radiologists. "The administrative level above the emergency department. It's already open." Sophia felt something move through her, not quite anger, not quite awe. Something between the two. Those are patient records." "We're not looking at patient records," Reyes said without looking up from his phone. "We're looking at authorization logs and financial routing codes, nothing clinical." She pressed her lips together. She understood the distinction. She didn't entirely accept it. But she also understood that the alternative, doing nothing, waiting, going back to her apartment and sitting there until whoever tried to kill her last night decided to make a second attempt, was not a real option. "Fine," she said. "The codes you're looking for have a prefix. 7 digits starting with 441. Both men looked at her. "You memorized them?" Dominic asked. "I memorized everything," she said. "I didn't trust that the records would stay where I put them." Alexander was watching her from across the table. She didn't look at him. 441 prefix, Reyes said, already typing. "Got 3 of them. Running the routing now." The room was quiet for a few minutes, except for the sound of keystrokes. Sophia sat down. Her ribs ached with a persistence that she was beginning to simply accept as the new baseline. She drank her coffee. "Here," Reyes said suddenly. Dominic crossed to look over his shoulder. He said nothing for a moment. Then he looked at Alexander. "It routes through Romano Consolidated," he said. "Sub-entity, shell structure underneath the main holding company. 3 layers deep." 3 layers, Alexander said. "That's not accidental placement." "No," Dominic agreed. "That's someone who knew the structure well enough to build inside it. Not someone who borrowed the name. Someone with architecture access." Alexander's expression did something that Sophia couldn't fully read. Not anger, it was past anger. Something colder. "When was the sub-entity created?" he asked. Reyes scrolled. 18 months ago." "What was happening 18 months ago?" Sophia asked. The two men looked at each other, then at Alexander. "I was in Europe for 4 months," Alexander said quietly. 18 months ago. A deal that required my presence overseas." "Who was running operations here while you were gone?" she asked. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Alexander Romano stood up from his chair. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to the room for several seconds. When he turned around, his face was composed in that controlled surgical way that she was beginning to recognize as the expression he wore when something had genuinely rattled him, and he refused to let it show all the way through. "My brother," he said. "Vincent." She had not expected that. Not the speed of it, the way the thread had pulled, and the answer had come so quickly, like a knot that had been waiting to be found. She watched Alexander absorb it. He didn't pace. He didn't raise his voice. He stood very still, which she was learning was its own kind of reaction. In a man like him, the stillness was where the storm lived. "Tell me about Vincent," she said. He looked at her. "Why?" "Because I'm a nurse," she said. "And when I'm trying to understand what's wrong with a patient, I don't start with the test results. I start with the person. Tell me about your brother." Something in his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Vincent is 41, he said. "He's been part of the organization since he was 19. He was always different from me. More aggressive, less patient." He paused. "I gave him authority over the business structures when I left, because he was the only person I trusted with that level of access. He knew the organization's finances better than anyone except my attorney. And your attorney, Sophia said. Do you trust him? Martin has been with our family for 30 years, Alexander said. That's not an answer to what I asked. He met her eyes. Yes, I trust him. Then we start with Vincent, she said. We don't start anything, Alexander said. And for the first time, there was an edge in his voice, not directed at her exactly, but present like something that had been held back, finally pressing against its container. You're not part of this investigation. I'm the only reason you know there is an investigation, she said. Someone tried to kill me last night. They will try again. The only advantage I have right now is that you found me before they could confirm I was dead, which means they may not know exactly where I am, or what I've told you. That window closes. I am absolutely part of this. The two men across the table said nothing. They both appeared to be studying their respective screens with profound interest in anything other than this conversation. Alexander looked at her for a long time. You're injured, he said. I'm aware. You have 2 cracked ribs and a concussion. I'm aware of that too. And you're sitting in my house telling me how my investigation is going to proceed. I'm sitting in your house, she said, because you put me here, and yes, I am. Another silence. And then, to her genuine surprise, he sat back down. Fine, he said. But you tell me everything you found. All of it. Not the version you gave me this morning, the real version. Every code, every name, every connection you traced. Because if Vincent did this, I need to know the full shape of it. And I need to know it before he knows I'm looking. She looked at him steadily. And if I tell you all of it, and it turns out you're not as separate from it as you're claiming, then you'll be in the same danger you're already in, he said. But you'll have told me. That's a terrible guarantee. It's the only one I have, he said. You want something better? You can try your luck calling 911 and see how far Vincent's reach extends into the police department before you get to finish your statement. It was blunt enough to be almost honest. She had considered that possibility herself, the fact that whoever had built a structure sophisticated enough to hide inside Romano Consolidated's shell corporations for 18 months was not someone who had done it without allies in various institutions. Going to law enforcement cold without understanding the full shape of what she was stepping into was as likely to get her disappeared as anything else. She exhaled. She told him everything. It took almost 2 hours. She was precise and sequential. She was a nurse. She gave reports in clinical order. She didn't editorialize until the facts were laid out. The codes. The patient file anomalies. The injury patterns she recognized. The financial routing she had traced through 3 evenings of careful work in the documentation room. The holding company filing that had led her to the Romano name. And the one thing she hadn't told him yet. There were 2 names that appeared as contacts on those patient files, she said. Registered as representatives for whoever was managing the intake process. Who? Alexander asked. One was a name I don't recognize. Caruso. First name Marcus. Dominic looked up from his laptop immediately. Marco Caruso. You know him? She asked. He manages logistics for the Northeast Corridor, Dominic said carefully. He glanced at Alexander. He reports to Vincent. And the second name? Alexander asked. His voice was very even now, the kind of even that required active maintenance. The second name was listed as the authorizing contact on the most recent set of records, Sophia said. The ones from 4 months ago. The ones with the injury pattern that made me start looking more carefully. Who was it? Alexander said. She looked at him directly. Gideon Cross. The name meant nothing to me, but the phone number listed beside it was the same phone number that appears in your public corporate filings as the contact line for Romano Consolidated's administrative office. The room went very quiet. Reyes stopped typing. Dominic closed his laptop slowly. Alexander Romano said nothing for approximately 10 seconds. When he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that she had to lean slightly forward to hear it. Gideon Cross is my brother's right hand, he said. He's been with Vincent for 11 years. He handles everything Vincent doesn't want documented. Then Gideon Cross's phone number being on those records isn't an accident, she said. No, Alexander said. It isn't. She watched him stand up again. This time, he didn't go to the window. He stood at the head of the table, and he looked at the papers in front of him, and she could see she was trained to see this in human bodies, the way stress and shock moved through the physical self. She could see the weight of it landing on him. The specific weight of betrayal. Not just organizational betrayal. The kind that came from someone you had trusted with the years of your life. Your brother isn't just running an operation you didn't approve, she said quietly. He built it inside your structure deliberately. 3 layers deep, using contacts who report to him. He didn't just take advantage of your absence. He planned this before you left. Alexander turned and looked at her. Why are you telling me that? He asked. That's not medical information. That's an interpretation. Because you're processing it as a betrayal that came from someone who cared about you and made a bad decision, she said. And I think you need to understand before you go any further that this was not impulsive. This was constructed by someone who knew your organization from the inside and chose to use it. That changes what you need to do next. He stared at her. You're telling me to be careful, he said. I'm telling you that a man who built this quietly for 18 months without you noticing is not going to react to being discovered the way you might expect, she said. He'll have a contingency. He'll have thought about what happens if you find out. You need to be ahead of that plan, not reacting to it. Something in his face that controlled unreadable surface cracked slightly. Not all the way, but enough for her to see something underneath it that was genuine. You just told me not to react impulsively, he said, to a betrayal that has been running for 18 months inside my own name. Yes, she said. That is, he said slowly, very easy advice to give. I know, she said. I'm sorry. She meant it. He heard that she meant it. She watched the crack in his expression move slightly the way a fracture shifted under pressure. Nobody apologizes to me, he said. It came out quieter than she thought he intended. I'm not apologizing for telling you the truth, she said. I'm expressing that it's hard to hear. Those are different things. He sat back down. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he looked at Dominic. Pull everything on Vincent's movements over the last 18 months, he said. Financial records, meetings, travel. Everything Marco Caruso and Gideon Cross touched. I want to know the exact size of what we're looking at. That's going to take time, Dominic said. Then start now, Alexander said. His voice was back to controlled. But it was a different kind of controlled than it had been that morning. It was controlled the way a man's voice goes when he has made a decision that cannot be undone. They worked through most of the day. Sophia was not a passive observer. She couldn't be because the medical records were her domain, and she was the only one in the room who could read the injury patterns with clinical authority. She sat beside Dominic and walked him through what she had found and what it meant, and Dominic cross-referenced it against the logistics records he was pulling. And a picture emerged that was worse than she had originally understood. It wasn't just the patients. It wasn't just the financial routing. The hospitals, plural. Not just St. Matthew's. 3 facilities spread across the city. All with the same administrative level vulnerability, all with the same routing codes. All processing patients who match the injury profile she recognized. This is a systematic operation, she said. Whoever is being brought through these facilities, they're being treated and released. But the records of their treatment are being kept internally, not filed with insurance or standard medical reporting. Which means whoever they are, they're not appearing anywhere in official records. Off-the-books medical care, Reyes said. For specific individuals, she said. People who need treatment but can't appear in any system. People who can't go to an emergency room under their real names. Witnesses, Alexander said from across the table. He had been quiet for the past 40 minutes, reading through financial documents Dominic had pulled. People who are cooperating with law enforcement, federal investigations, witness protection candidates. The room went still. Sophia looked at him. You think someone is identifying protected witnesses and getting them hurt enough to need medical care, Alexander said, and then tracking them through the care system. Finding out who they are, where they're being kept, what they've told investigators. He set down the papers. The injuries aren't punishment. They're a mechanism. You hurt someone enough that they need a hospital. If you control the intake of that hospital at the administrative level, you find out who they are when they present. You find out their real identity, their real location, and then you sell that information. Sophia sat with that for a moment. And my records, she said. I found the records because I was doing billing reconciliation. I was comparing patient arrivals to supply usage. I wasn't looking for this. But whoever monitors the administrative system would have flagged your queries, Dominic said. He looked slightly pale. Even wrapped in routine requests, someone with deep access to that system would have a filter running for any query that touched those specific records. Which means, she said slowly, they didn't just know I was getting close. They knew exactly which records I had accessed, exactly how much I understood. They knew what you found before you knew what you'd found, Alexander said. She absorbed that. How long between my last documentation session and last night? She asked. Reyes checked something. Your hospital badge log shows your last access to the documentation room as 5 days ago. 5 days, she said. They waited 5 days. Why? They were watching whether you reported it, Alexander said. If you went to administration or law enforcement in those 5 days, they needed to know. When you didn't. When I didn't, they decided I was keeping it to use myself, she said. Or that I was building something. Either way, you became a threat that needed to be eliminated, he said. Not warned. Eliminated. Because warning you meant acknowledging you had found something real. She pressed her hand against her ribs. The pain grounded her. She needed grounding right now. So there are witnesses, she said. Possibly active federal witnesses. People who have been identified through this system and whose information has been compromised. Those people may be in danger right now. Yes, Alexander said. And your brother is at the center of this. A pause. Vincent is at the center of this. Yes. She looked at him directly. Then this is bigger than me being thrown off a highway. This is bigger than your organization being used without your knowledge. If active witnesses have been compromised. Federal jurisdiction, Dominic said quietly. People could be dying, she said. People may already have died. The weight of that landed in the room. Alexander stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his hands loose at his sides, and she watched him breathe. She noticed breathing. It was involuntary at this point, and she watched him process something that would have broken a different person in that moment. His organization, his name, his brother, and somewhere in the city, people whose safety had been destroyed by all three. When he turned around, his expression was set. You said something last night, he said to her. When I asked you to trust me. You said you saved my life, but that doesn't mean I believe you're a good man. She remembered. I said it. I want you to know, he said, that I am not going to pretend the last 20 years didn't happen. I've done things that deserved what you said. My organization has done things I won't defend. He paused. But I did not do this. And the people who are in danger because of what's running under my name, that's mine to fix. Not because I'm a good man. Because it's running under my name. And that's mine. She looked at him for a long time. Okay, she said. Okay, she repeated. Then we figure out how to fix it, together. Because you need what I found, and I need what you can access. And neither of us can do this alone. He nodded once. It was a small movement, but it was real. We start tonight, he said. We find Vincent before he finds out I'm looking. And we find out how deep this goes before anyone else gets hurt. Sophia looked down at her hands. At the butterfly closures on the cut above her eye. At the coffee mug that had gone cold an hour ago. She thought about the night before. The locked car, the rain, the silence of a highway that no one was supposed to find her on. She thought about the files in the documentation room. The names that weren't names. The injuries she recognized. The authorization codes that ran to a man who was sitting across from her, now processing the betrayal of someone he had trusted with everything. She was not safe. She understood that completely. But she was not alone in this anymore. And that she had learned in 3 years of emergency medicine was sometimes the only thing standing between a person who survived and a person who didn't. The difference between someone who made it to morning and someone who didn't wasn't always the severity of the injury. Sometimes it was just whether anyone was there. She picked up the cold coffee and drank it anyway. "Tonight then," she said. The plan was simple. Simple plans were the only kind that survived contact with reality. Alexander would reach out to Vincent through normal channels, a routine business call, the kind that happened between them twice a week. Nothing that would register as unusual to anyone monitoring communications. He would keep his brother talking long enough for Dominic to run a location trace and confirm where Vincent was operating from. Reyes would cross-reference the financial movements from the past 18 months against known federal investigation timelines to determine how many witnesses had potentially been compromised. And Sophia would write out a complete clinical record of everything she had found. Every injury pattern, every medical notation, every detail that could only be interpreted by someone with her training. Because that documentation was the kind of evidence that courts needed, and that couldn't be reconstructed from financial records alone. That was the plan at 7 in the evening. By 9, 3 things had gone wrong. The first was the call. Alexander dialed Vincent's personal line and got a response in 2 rings, not Vincent's voice. A man Sophia didn't recognize. He said Vincent was unavailable and would return the call within the hour. Alexander kept his voice neutral and said that was fine and ended it. He set the phone on the table and looked at Dominic. "Vincent doesn't use an intermediary for my calls," he said. "Not ever." "He knows," Dominic said. "He suspects," Alexander corrected. "There's a difference. If he knew that call would have gone differently." The second problem came from Reyes, who had been running the federal investigation timeline for 2 hours and had gone very quiet in the way that meant the numbers were producing something he didn't want to report. "Talk to me," Alexander said. Reyes turned his laptop around. "I cross-referenced the injury profile Sophia described against reported incidents in the federal witness relocation system. Not the classified records, the public adjacent ones, the ones that show up as gaps in prosecution timelines. Cases where witnesses went silent, testified differently than their statements, disappeared before trial." "How many?" Sophia asked. 14, Reyes said. "Over 18 months, across 6 separate federal investigations." The number sat in the room like something physical. 14 people. 14 people who had been identified hurt, tracked through a medical system that was supposed to protect them, and then what threatened, bought, disappeared. "Are any of them dead?" she asked. Reyes hesitated. 3 prosecutions collapsed entirely. The witnesses in those cases are listed as uncooperative. There's no record of them after a certain point. Sophia pressed her hand flat on the table. She needed the solidity of it. 3 people, she said. "Possibly," Reyes said. "We don't know for certain." "But possibly," she said. "Yes," he said. "Possibly." She looked at Alexander. I was looking at Reyes's screen. His jaw was working slightly, not chewing, just a small controlled movement that happened when a person was keeping something contained that wanted very badly to come out. "Your brother," she said quietly, "may have gotten people killed." "I know," he said. "Not criminals," she said. "People who trusted the system enough to cooperate with it. People who tried to do the right thing and paid for it." "I know, Sophia." His voice was very low, very flat. The flatness was not indifference. She could see clearly that it was not indifference. It was a man holding something enormous very carefully, so it didn't shatter in the wrong direction. "What do you want to do?" she asked. He turned and looked at her. "What I want to do and what I'm going to do are 2 different things tonight." "Then tell me what you're going to do." "I'm going to find my brother," he said. "And I'm going to look him in the face. And I'm going to let him tell me himself." She shook her head. It's not strategic," he said. "I know, but I need to hear it from him. I need to look at him and know for certain. Because if I'm wrong, even a fraction of wrong, and I move on this without giving him that moment, then I'm the thing everyone has always believed I am." She understood that, more than she expected to. "Then we do it your way," she said. "But not alone. I go with you." "Absolutely not." He doesn't know who I am, she said. You're a known quantity to him. He'll be prepared for you. He won't be prepared for me. Which is exactly why you're not coming, Alexander said. Because unprepared men make violent decisions. I've been in a trauma bay with men who just found out their children didn't survive, she said. I know how to be in a room with someone who is about to break. I know how to read what's coming before it arrives. You need that. The argument sat between them. She's right, Dominic said from across the table. Alexander looked at him. Dominic held up both hands slightly. I'm just saying, she's right. The third thing that went wrong happened at 9:47, when Sophia's reconstructed clinical documentation was almost complete, and her borrowed phone buzzed with a message from a number she didn't recognize. She looked at it. She went cold. The message contained 3 words and a photograph. The words were, "We know where." The photograph was of her apartment building, taken from street level. Taken recently, she could see the light configuration she recognized from the lobby, the one that had been installed 3 weeks ago after a bulb replacement. The photograph was not old. She stood up slowly. Alexander. Something in her voice made him cross the room immediately. He took the phone and looked at the message. He looked at the photograph. He turned to Dominic. My apartment, Sophia said. They know where I live. They've had someone there. Your building has a night doorman, Dominic said already on his own phone. There's a side entrance, she said. Residents use it. It's key-coded, but the code hasn't changed in 2 years. It's the same code for the entire building. Anyone could have it. Is there anything in your apartment that connects to what you found? Alexander asked. She thought. Her printed records were stored somewhere else. She had been careful about that. But her laptop. Her laptop had the browsing history from when she had traced the corporate filings. She had cleared it, but clearing a browser history wasn't the same as eliminating it for someone who knew how to look. My laptop, she said. It's in my apartment. Then it's already gone, Dominic said, not cruelly factually. If they've had someone there, they have it. But they sent this message, she said. If they already had what they needed, why send this? Why tell me they know where I am? Alexander looked at her. Because they don't want your laptop. They want you. She breathed through that for a moment. They need to know what you told and who you told it to, he said. The laptop shows what you found. It doesn't show who you've spoken to. It doesn't show what you've given to law enforcement, or what copies exist, or whether there's already a report sitting in some investigator's file somewhere. They need to know the exposure, she said. They need to know if they're already too late to contain this, he said. And the only way to find that out is through you. She looked down at the phone, at those 3 words. We know where. This message wasn't sent to frighten me, she said slowly. It was sent to move me, to make me run, or to make you move me somewhere they can follow. Alexander took the phone from her hand and set it on the table face down. Yes. So they know you have me. They know I found someone on that highway, he said. They may not know yet that it's you specifically, or they know exactly and they're trying to determine how much you've told me. He paused. Either way, the message was designed to trigger a response. And we don't respond, she said. We don't respond, he confirmed. The room was very quiet for a moment. Then Reyes said, the location trace from the call came back. Everyone turned. Vincent's phone pinged from a location on the east side, Reyes said. Commercial building. He's been there for at least 4 hours. The phone hasn't moved. Alexander looked at Dominic. That building, Dominic said carefully, belongs to a holding company that has no connection to Romano Consolidated. On paper. But 3 of the logistics contractors who run through our northeast corridor use it as a shipping address. Vincent set up a parallel structure, Alexander said. It wasn't a question. He's been running 2 operations simultaneously, Dominic said. Yours, which he managed in your absence, and his own, which he built inside yours as cover. He's been preparing to separate, Alexander said. This wasn't just about money. He was building towards something independent, using my infrastructure as the foundation. Sophia watched his face through this. She watched him arrive at the full shape of it, not just the betrayal, but the strategy behind the betrayal, the patience of it, the long game. His brother had spent 18 months constructing an exit using Alexander's own empire as the scaffolding. He was going to leave, Alexander said, quietly, almost to himself, with enough capital and enough leverage over federal investigations to protect himself, Dominic said. The compromised witnesses, that's not just income, that's insurance. Evidence he could hold over law enforcement to keep himself untouchable. He sold people, Sophia said. Her voice came out harder than she intended. He identified protected witnesses and sold that information to whoever wanted them neutralized. And he did it under your name, so that if it ever surfaced, it surfaces as mine, Alexander said. And he walks away clean, she said. With money, with leverage, and with your organization's collapse as cover for his exit. The silence that followed was devastating in its completeness. She watched Alexander absorb it. She watched the moment where the last part of him that was holding on to an alternative explanation let it go. It moved through his body, the way a wave moves something that started at his jaw and traveled down through his shoulders and settled somewhere in his chest. She had seen that in patients. The moment when someone stopped fighting the diagnosis. "Okay," he said. It was very quiet. "Alexander." "Give me a minute," he said. She gave him the minute. She sat very still, and she gave him the minute, and she watched him stand at the table with his hands pressed flat against the surface, and she didn't say anything, because she understood that some things needed their space before they could become something a person could function through. When he straightened up, he was someone different than he had been 60 seconds ago. Not harder, she would have expected harder, but cleaner somehow. Like the ambiguity had been burning up energy he didn't know he'd been spending. "We go tonight," he said. "We go to that building. And we do this before Vincent decides that whatever message they just sent you isn't working and tries something more direct." "What do we do when we get there?" she asked. "We get the truth from him," he said. "All of it. On record. And then we decide what to do with it." "On record how?" He looked at Dominic. Dominic held up a device she recognized as a high-end audio recorder, the kind that produced files clean enough for court. She looked back at Alexander. "You've done this before." "The recording part, yes," he said. "The rest of this?" He paused. "No. This is the first time." They took 2 vehicles. Alexander rode with Sophia and Dominic in the first car. Reyes followed in the second, with 2 men from Alexander's security detail, who had been briefed carefully on the instruction that tonight was an information operation, not a confrontation operation. In the car. Sophia sat beside Alexander, and neither of them spoke for several minutes. The city moved around them, the normal, indifferent city full of people who were doing ordinary things, and had no idea that somewhere in the East Side, a man was sitting in a building he had secretly built with his brother's money and someone else's suffering. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "Vincent, growing up, was he always—" "No," Alexander said, before she could finish the question. He was funny. When we were young, he was the one who could make anyone laugh. He had this way of reading a room. He always knew exactly what people needed to hear." He paused. "I used to think it was a gift. I didn't understand until later that it was practice. He was always testing what worked." "When did it change?" He was quiet for a moment. "Gradually. The way things change gradually. I kept thinking I was misreading him. That he was stressed or ambitious or reacting to something. I kept making excuses that he was my brother and I knew him, and I would have seen it if something was genuinely wrong." "You trusted him," she said. "I gave him everything," he said. "Because I trusted him, and because giving him power was the closest I could get to giving him—" He stopped. "To giving him what?" she asked. "To giving him what he deserved," Alexander said. "He's my younger brother. I built everything while he was still becoming himself. I always felt like he had been eclipsed. By my reputation, by the organization. I thought giving him authority was making it right." She understood that. She understood it in a way she hadn't expected to, because she knew what it felt like to give someone everything you had and have them use it in ways you hadn't intended. "That's not a mistake you should carry," she said. He looked at her. What you gave him came from the right place, she said. What he did with it is his. Those belong to different people. He was quiet for a moment. You give people a lot of grace, he said. I work in emergency medicine, she said. I've seen what people do when they're at their worst, and what they do when they're at their best. Sometimes it's the same person within 10 minutes. Grace isn't naivety, it's just accuracy. He looked out the window. I haven't been given much of it. I know, she said. That doesn't mean it isn't real when it shows up. The car slowed. They were close. The building was dark on the outside, in the way that buildings full of activity are sometimes dark. Everything contained, nothing leaking out. Dominic confirmed the phone signal was still active inside. Reyes confirmed from the second vehicle that the exterior was clear. Alexander looked at Sophia. You stay back from the initial contact. When I've established the situation, I'll bring you in. What does establishing the situation look like? She asked. It looks like me walking in and sitting down with my brother, he said. And if he isn't alone, then Dominic handles the room and I handle Vincent. He held her gaze. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. She believed him. She wasn't entirely sure why she believed him, but she did. Go, she said. He went. She sat in the car with Reyes and watched the building and counted her breathing and pressed her hand carefully against her ribs. 2 minutes passed. 3. 4. At the 5-minute mark, Dominic's voice came through the earpiece. Reyes was wearing, we're in. Alexander has visual on Vincent. 2 others in the room, Gideon Cross, and 1 unidentified. We're separating them now. Reyes relayed to Sophia, they're in. Is it clear? She asked. Dominic says come up. She got out of the car. She heard Vincent before she saw him. His voice was carrying through the door, not shouting, but the kind of raised voice that meant a conversation had already passed the point of pretense. She couldn't make out words yet, only tone. And the tone was not the tone of someone caught off guard. It was the tone of someone who had prepared for this conversation and was delivering a version of it they had rehearsed. She pushed the door open. The room was a large interior space. She took in the details quickly and practically, the way she assessed a trauma bay. 3 other men present besides Alexander and Vincent, 2 of whom were now being managed at the far end of the space by Alexander's security detail. Gideon Cross was seated unnaturally still, with the expression of a man calculating odds. And at the center, standing across from Alexander, was Vincent Romano. She had not known what she expected. Something more sinister, perhaps. Something that looked like the accumulation of 18 months of calculated betrayal. What she saw was a man who looked almost exactly like Alexander. Same height, same jaw, same dark eyes, except where Alexander's stillness was controlled from the inside, where it came from something disciplined and contained. Vincent's stillness was performed. She could see the performance of it. The practiced steadiness of someone who had decided how this scene was going to go before it began. He saw her the moment she walked in. His eyes moved from her face to Alexander's, and something shifted in his expression. Not fear, not guilt, calculation. A rapid recalculation. You brought someone, Vincent said. Who is this? Her name is Sophia Bennett, Alexander said. She's a nurse at St. Matthew's Hospital. She found your operation 6 weeks ago. Something happened in Vincent's face. Very small. Very fast. If she hadn't been trained to watch for the involuntary, tells the micro-expressions that preceded conscious control, she would have missed it. But she didn't miss it. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't guilt. It was recognition. He already knew her name. She felt the cold move through her entire body. He already knew who she was. He had known for 6 weeks. He had known since she first accessed those records. He had been watching her. He had been deciding for 6 weeks what to do about her. And then he had made that decision 5 days ago, had waited to see whether she would report it, and when she didn't, had sent someone to put her car off a highway. You knew, she said. She wasn't planning to speak. It came out of her because the knowledge of it demanded a voice. You knew it was me. You've known for 6 weeks. Vincent looked at her with eyes that held nothing she could name as human warmth. You were thorough, he said. I'll give you that. Most people would have stopped at the first discrepancy. "Vincent," Alexander said. His voice was very quiet. "She didn't stop," Vincent said, turning his eyes to his brother. "She went 3 layers deep, on her own, in her own time, because—" He tilted his head slightly, looking at Sophia. "Why, what made you keep going?" "The injuries," she said. "I recognized the pattern. I knew what caused them." "Ah." He nodded slowly. "The medical knowledge, yes. That was the variable I didn't account for. A billing administrator would have stopped at the financial anomaly. A nurse with your specific background." He paused. "That was bad luck." "Was it bad luck for the witnesses?" she said. "The people you identified and sold, was that just bad luck for them too?" Something in the room changed with those words. She felt it. The quality of the silence sharpened. Vincent looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Alexander. "How much have you told her?" "She told me," Alexander said. "She put it together herself." 14 federal investigations, Sophia said. 18 months, 3 prosecutions collapsed, 3 witnesses unaccounted for. "You did your research," Vincent said. "Are they dead?" she asked. He looked at her with the same measured expression. "I don't track outcomes," he said. The rage that moved through her was clean and cold, and she let it come because it was appropriate and because she was not going to pretend it wasn't there. She was not going to be careful about this particular thing. "You don't track outcomes. You identified people who were trying to do the right thing, people who were already afraid, people who had already given up everything to cooperate with an investigation, and you sold their locations, and now you don't track outcomes." "Sophia." Alexander's voice was a warning, not at her, she understood. At the room, at the temperature of it. But she held Vincent's gaze. "You ran all of this under your brother's name. You used his corporate structure, his contacts, his reputation. His reputation." Vincent's voice finally cracked slightly, not with guilt, with something sharper. "His reputation. You mean the reputation that I helped build, the territory I managed for 15 years before he decided I needed to be supervised. The organization that has my work in every part of it, with his name on every part of it." "Vincent," Alexander said. "Don't." Vincent's voice dropped. The performance was beginning to slip. "Don't do the quiet voice. You do the quiet voice when you've already decided something, and you want the other person to feel like they had a choice. I know you, Alexander. I've known you my entire life. Then you know I'm not here to—" "You're here because she found something, and she told you, and now you're here with a recorder in Dominic's jacket pocket, and you want me to give you a clean confession so you can decide what to do with it and feel like you handled it correctly." Vincent's voice was steady, but the steadiness was entirely different from what it had been 4 minutes ago. The performance had dropped, and underneath it was something raw and furious and old. "You always need to handle things correctly. You always need to be the one who makes the right call." "Vincent." "I built something," Vincent said. "I built something that works, that sustains itself, that doesn't require you or your approval or your moral architecture to function. And yes, I used your structure, because your structure was there, and I built half of it, and my name is nowhere on it." "Your name is everywhere on it now," Alexander said quietly. "Because people were hurt, because witnesses are dead, because you took something I gave you as trust, and you used it for this." "Everything you have came from the same place mine did," Vincent said. "The same methods, the same decisions. You just made them earlier before you decided you had enough and could afford to have principles." "That's not what this is about," Alexander said. "Then what is it about?" Vincent said. Tell me what the difference is between what I did and what you did at 25, at 30. Tell me where the line is that I crossed that you never did." The silence that followed was the most complicated silence Sophia had ever been in. She watched Alexander. She watched him absorb the question, not dismiss it, actually absorb it. She could see him doing it, letting the accusation land and sitting with it instead of deflecting. "The witnesses," Alexander said finally. "That's the line. That's where it's different. Everything else, the money, the structure, using my name without asking, I would have been angry. I would have felt betrayed. but I would have understood the logic of it. The witnesses, those were people who had already paid an enormous price. And you sold them. That's business, Vincent said. No, Alexander said. That's the thing I never did. I made choices I'm not proud of. I caused harm I can't undo. But I never sold a person who was already at their most vulnerable to someone who wanted them destroyed. That's the line. And you know it's the line. You've always known where it is. Vincent said nothing for a moment. Then something in his face did something she didn't expect. The anger shifted. It didn't leave it compressed, moved inward, became something smaller and more private. And underneath it for just a moment, she saw something that looked almost like grief. Not for what he'd done. Not guilt. Something older than that. Something that had been sitting in him for a very long time. You were always going to be the one they talked about, Vincent said, very quietly. From the beginning. Stood that. I accepted it. But you never... He stopped. I never what? Alexander asked. You never once asked me what I wanted, Vincent said. You decided what I needed. You gave me authority because you decided I deserved it. You gave me control because you decided I'd earned it. Everything you gave me was on your terms on your timeline because you decided. And then you left for 4 months and put me in charge of your organization, not mine, and expected me to... He exhaled. To be grateful. The room was very quiet. Sophia looked at Alexander. She watched his face move through something painful. Vincent, he said. Don't apologize, Vincent said. It's too late for that. I'm not going to apologize, Alexander said. I'm going to ask you to tell me everything, every witness, every contact, every transaction. Because if there are people out there who are still in danger, who can still be protected, I need that information. Tonight. Before anyone else gets hurt. Vincent looked at him for a long moment. And then what? He asked. What happens to me after I give you that? Alexander met his eyes. I don't know yet, he said. It was honest in a way she hadn't expected. Not a threat, not a promise. Just the truth. That's not a good enough answer, Vincent said. It's the only one I have, Alexander said. But I'll tell you this, the witnesses, the ones who might still be alive and still in danger, that's not negotiable. That information comes first. Everything else we figure out. Vincent looked down at the table. He was very still. Then he looked at Sophia. You're the one who started this, he said. Yes, she said. You could have stopped, he said. At any point. You could have let it go. I know, she said. I couldn't. He studied her for a moment. Why not? She met his gaze. Because the person in those files, the one whose injuries I recognized at 2 in the morning, in a documentation room, that person deserved someone who couldn't let it go. Something moved through his expression. There are 2, he said quietly. 2 who are still active, still in the protection system. Their locations were sold 3 weeks ago. I don't know if the buyers have moved yet. Who bought the information? Alexander said immediately. Vincent gave him a name. Dominic's head came up sharply from across the room. We need to move on that tonight, Alexander said to Dominic. Then to Vincent. Gideon Cross, is he the one who managed the hospital intake? Gideon managed everything operational, Vincent said. I built the structure, he ran it. He'll run, Dominic said. He's already thinking about it. Alexander said, glancing toward where Gideon Cross was sitting with Alexander's security detail. We have maybe 20 minutes before he decides staying is more dangerous than leaving. He looked at Sophia. Just looked at her. She understood what he was asking. The clinical documentation I was building tonight, she said. I have it. It's not complete, but it's enough. Paired with what Vincent just told you, it's enough for someone to act on. Enough for who? Alexander asked. Enough for the right federal investigator, she said. Someone who isn't already compromised by what Vincent built. Someone outside the investigations that were targeted. Can you identify that person? I know someone, she said. A doctor I trained under. She left clinical medicine for forensic medical consulting. She has federal contacts I trust. She paused. She's the person I was going to go to before someone ran me off a highway. Alexander nodded. He turned back to the room, to the careful, controlled chaos of everything that needed to happen in the next hour. Gideon Vincent. The two witnesses, still in danger. The chain of information that needed to move quickly and precisely through the right channels before anyone could cut it. He moved through the room with a clarity that she hadn't seen in him before. Not the coldness of the man his reputation described. Something more focused than that, a man who had seen the full shape of the damage and was moving to stop it from spreading further. She watched him work. She watched him make 3 calls in rapid succession, speaking in short, precise sentences that told her he had done this before. Managed crises, assembled information, deployed people with targeted efficiency. She watched him stop in front of Vincent and look at his brother for a long moment before turning away without a word. She sat down in the chair nearest the door because her ribs had reached the point where standing was negotiating with diminishing returns, and she pressed her hand carefully against her side and breathed. They had the truth now, the full shape of it. Which meant the hardest part wasn't over. The hardest part was just beginning, because truth without consequence was just a story. And the people still in danger, the 2 witnesses whose locations had already been sold, didn't have time for stories. They had maybe hours, possibly less. Sophia looked at her hands. She looked at the butterfly closures above her eye, and the careful way she was holding her body around the damage to her ribs, and she thought about the documentation room at 2 in the morning, and the moment she had read a name that had started all of this. She had not known in that moment how far the thread would pull. She knew now, and she was still holding it. The name Vincent gave them was Harlan Briggs. Sophia didn't know it, but the way Dominic reacted, the small controlled intake of breath, the way his hands went still over his keyboard for exactly 2 seconds before he started moving again, told her that Alexander's people knew it very well. "Talk," Alexander said to Dominic. "Harlan Briggs runs a private security consulting operation out of Jersey," Dominic said. "On paper, underneath that, he's a broker. He connects people who need information with people who have it. He's worked adjacent to 3 different organized crime structures without being formally attached to any of them. Federal agencies know he exists. He's never been charged because he's careful enough to be 3 steps removed from every transaction." "Until now," Alexander said. "Until now," Dominic confirmed. "If Vincent sold witness location data to Briggs, Briggs already has buyers lined up. He doesn't hold inventory. He moves it." "How fast does he move it?" Sophia asked. "Hours to days," Dominic said, "depending on the buyer's urgency and payment." "Vincent said the sale happened 3 weeks ago," she said. The math was immediate and horrible. 3 weeks. Which meant the information had been in Briggs's hands for 3 weeks. Which meant the buyers had potentially had it for nearly that long. Which meant 2 people somewhere in the federal witness protection system had been living for weeks with a target on them that they didn't know existed. "Are they still alive?" she asked. Not to anyone specifically. To the room. To the universe. "We don't know," Alexander said. "We need to know," she said. "Before anything else, before Gideon, before Vincent, before the documentation. We need to find out if those 2 people are still alive, and if they are, we need to make sure they stay that way." "Agreed," Alexander said. He looked at Dominic. "Can we get to Briggs tonight?" "We can get to his operation," Dominic said. "Getting him to confirm whether the information has already been acted on, that's a different conversation." "I'll have that conversation," Alexander said. Sophia looked at him. She had been learning to read the specific weight of his sentences, the ones that were statements of fact, and the ones that were something else. That one was something else. "Alexander," she said. He looked at her. "What does having that conversation look like?" she asked. "It looks like me asking him a question and him answering it," he said. "And if he doesn't want to answer," he held her gaze. "Then I ask differently." She understood what he meant. She held his gaze for a moment, and then she said something she hadn't planned to say. "If you hurt him to get the information," she said, "and that information becomes part of a federal case, the way you obtained it becomes a problem. The defense uses it. The case gets complicated. The witnesses being dead becomes a bigger problem," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not telling you not to find him. I'm telling you to think about how, because right now, Right now, we have something we've never had before. We have documentation. We have Vincent's confession on a recording. We have the clinical records. We have the financial routing. We are closer to a legitimate case against all of this than anyone has ever been. Don't give the wrong person a reason to unravel it." He stood very still for a moment. "You're telling me to be patient," he said. "I'm telling you there's a version of tonight where we save those two people and still have everything intact to make sure no one can run this operation again," she said. "And there's a version where we save them, but destroy the case in the process, and 6 months from now, someone else builds the same structure with different names. I want the first version." The room was quiet enough that she could hear Reyes typing at the far end of the table. "How?" Alexander asked. "My contact," she said. "Dr. Carol Weston. She does forensic medical consulting for federal cases. She has relationships with the U.S. Marshals Service, which is who manages witness protection. If I call her right now tonight and give her what we have, she can trigger a welfare check on both witnesses through legitimate channels, fast, within the hour if I explain the urgency." "A welfare check," Alexander said. "Not a rescue. If they're alive and safe, a welfare check confirms it and gets them moved to a different location immediately," she said. "If they're not, then we know and we deal with what we know, but we do it in a way that keeps everything else intact." He looked at her for a long moment. She could feel him weighing at the instinct that had run his world for 20 years against something different. Something she was offering that didn't fit the architecture of how he had always operated. "Make the call," he said. Dr. Carol Weston answered on the fourth ring, which for 11 at night was almost miraculous. Sophia had worked under her for 14 months during her residency rotation, and Carol Weston was the kind of person who answered calls at 11 at night because she understood that the world did not organize its crises around business hours. "Sophia," she said. And then immediately with the particular radar of someone who had spent decades reading people. "What happened to you?" "I need you to listen carefully," Sophia said. "And I need you to not ask me questions until I'm done, because I have a lot of information and not much time." She talked for 8 minutes. She gave Carol everything. The injury patterns, the hospital records, the routing codes, the federal investigation timeline, the two witnesses. She gave her Dominic's number to receive the documentation files. She gave her the recording of Vincent's confession. When she finished, the line was quiet for 3 seconds. "You were in a car crash last night," Carol said. "I was run off a highway," Sophia said. "Yes." "And you're currently where?" "Somewhere safe," Sophia said. "For now." "Carol, the two witnesses." "I'm already texting my contact at the Marshals while we talk," Carol said. "Names?" Sophia looked at Vincent. Vincent was sitting across the room under the watchful presence of Alexander's security detail. She walked toward him. He looked at her. "The names of the witnesses," she said quietly. "The two whose locations were sold." He looked at her for a moment. Something in his face was different from what it had been an hour ago. The layered performance of it had fully collapsed. What was underneath was not pleasant, but it was real. It was a man sitting with what he had done without the architecture of justification to hold it at a distance anymore. He gave her 2 names. She walked back to the phone. She gave Carol the names. "Give me 12 minutes, Carol said. Sophia held the phone and waited. 12 minutes was a very long time to stand still with 2 people's lives in the balance. She counted her breathing. She pressed her free hand against her ribs. She looked at Alexander, who was across the room talking quietly to Dominic, and she thought about the thing he had said on the embankment the night before when he pulled her out of the car. "Look at me. Stay awake. You're not dying here." She had not known in that moment what she was being pulled into. She had known only that a man had appeared in the rain and chosen to stop, and chosen to reach through the glass, and chosen to say those words instead of driving past. She thought about choice a lot in the next 12 minutes. Carol's voice came back. "Both witnesses are confirmed safe and in contact with their handlers," she said. "The Marshals are moving them tonight. Both locations are being changed as of right now." Sophia exhaled. The breath came out longer and shakier than she intended. She pressed her hand harder against her ribs to steady herself. "Sophia," Carol said. "I'm here," she said. What you just gave me, Carol said. The documentation, the recording, the financial routing. This is... A pause. This is significant. Do you understand how significant? I'm beginning to, she said. I need you to come in, Carol said. Not tonight, get somewhere secure and sleep. But tomorrow morning, I have someone you need to meet. Someone who has been working adjacent to the investigations that were compromised. Someone who will want everything you have. Who? His name is Garrett, Carol said. He's with the FBI's Organized Crime Division. He's been investigating witness compromise incidents for 7 months, and he's been hitting walls because someone inside the investigations was feeding information back out. He didn't know the mechanism. You just gave him the mechanism. Sophia looked across the room at Alexander. There's something you need to know before you bring in this Garrett, she said. Tell me, Carol said. The person I'm with tonight, she said carefully. He's the one whose corporate structure was used without his knowledge. He's the reason we have the recording. He's the reason we found everything. He's also... She paused. He has a history with federal law enforcement that is complicated. I need to know that bringing this information to your contact doesn't immediately become a situation where he becomes the target instead of the people who actually ran this. The silence on Carol's end was thoughtful. You're protecting him, Carol said. I'm protecting the integrity of the information, Sophia said. Those are related, but not identical. Sophia, Carol said, and her voice was careful in a way that told Sophia she was parsing something carefully herself. Who exactly are you with tonight? Someone who stopped on a highway, Sophia said, and everything that followed from that. Another pause. I'll talk to Garrett before you meet him, Carol said. I'll establish the parameters. He wants the operation, not the person who helped expose it. I'll make that clear. Thank you, Sophia said. Don't thank me yet, Carol said. Get some sleep. You sound like you've been through something serious. 2 cracked ribs and a concussion, Sophia said. Sophia. I'll sleep, she said. Thank you, Carol. She ended the call. She stood for a moment with the phone in her hand. Then she turned and found Alexander already looking at her from across the room. They're safe, she said. Both of them. Being moved tonight. Something moved across his face. She had seen a lot of things on that face in the past 24 hours. Control assessment, grief, fury. The particular blankness of a man absorbing something unbearable. What moved across it now was different from all of those. It was relief. And it was not the controlled, contained kind. It was genuine and unguarded, and it lasted only a few seconds before he put it away, but she saw it. Good, he said. His voice was slightly rougher than usual. My contact is bringing in an FBI investigator tomorrow morning, she said. Someone who has been working on the witness compromise cases. I told her about your involvement, the corporate structure, the recording, your cooperation tonight. She's going to establish parameters before the meeting. He nodded slowly. Parameters. Meaning they want the operation, she said. Not you. He looked at her steadily. That's not something you can guarantee. No, she said. But it's something Carol can work toward. And it's something that's more likely if you come to that meeting voluntarily with everything you have. You want me to walk into a room with federal investigators, he said. I want you to walk into a room with federal investigators, she confirmed. Yes. With 20 years of history between my organization and federal law enforcement. With a recording of your brother confessing to witness identification and sale, she said. With documentation linking a specific financial structure to the operation. With clinical records that establish the medical mechanism used. And with 2 witnesses who are alive tonight who might not have been if you hadn't made the choices you made in the last 12 hours. He was quiet for a long moment. You think that matters to them, he said. I think it matters to the right person, she said. And Carol is going to find the right person. He turned away from her for a moment. She let him have it. She sat down on the nearest available surface because her ribs had reached the point of demanding it, and she pressed her hand against her side and breathed carefully and waited. Across the room. Gideon Cross was being dealt with by Dominic and Reyes in a way that she was deliberately not looking at directly. She could hear the conversation, Dominic asking precise, flat-voiced questions, and Gideon answering them with the rapid compliance of someone who had calculated that cooperation was now his best remaining option. She heard the names of contacts, buyers, transaction dates. She heard the shape of the operation filling in further, the full map of it, the reach of it, the number of hands that had touched it. It was larger than she had known. Larger even than Reyes had estimated from the federal investigation timelines. She heard a name she recognized from the financial routing, a hospital administrator at one of the 3 facilities Vincent had used. Someone who had been paid to look away. Someone who had known what the intake irregularities meant and had allowed them because they were being compensated for that allowance. That one hit differently, because that was someone who had stood inside a hospital, inside a place that was supposed to exist solely for the protection of people in their most vulnerable moments, and had chosen to let it be used to identify and destroy those people. She had spent 3 years in emergency medicine believing that hospitals were the last honest ground, the place where nothing else mattered except what was wrong with the person in front of you and what you could do about it. Someone had used that ground as a hunting mechanism. She pressed her hand harder against her ribs. "Hey." Alexander had come back. He was standing in front of her close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. "You need to stop pushing through this." "I'm fine," she said. "Your face says otherwise," he said. "My face isn't a clinical instrument, Sophia." He sat down beside her, not across from her, beside her. The way someone sits when they're done maintaining a professional distance. "The witnesses are safe. Dominic has everything we need from Gideon. The recording is intact. The documentation is with your contact. For the next several hours, there is nothing more that needs to happen that requires you to be on your feet and managing your pain." She looked at him sideways. "What are you doing with Vincent tonight?" she asked. "He stays here," he said, "under supervision. Tomorrow he comes to the meeting with the FBI. His cooperation is part of what makes this viable." "Will he agree to that?" "He already has," Alexander said. She looked at him. "You talked to him while I was on the phone." "I did." "What did you say?" I was quiet for a moment. "I told him that the 2 witnesses were safe, that they were alive and being moved." She waited. "He didn't say anything for a while," Alexander said. And then he said, a pause. He said he was glad. She sat with that, the weight of it. A man who had built a machine that had endangered people's lives, sitting in a chair being told those people were still alive and saying he was glad. "Do you believe him?" she asked. "I believe that some part of him that still exists is glad," Alexander said carefully. "Whether that changes what he did, no, it doesn't. But it tells me who's still in there underneath everything he became." She nodded slowly. "That's generous." "You told me this morning that what I give someone comes from the right place," he said. "And what they do with it is theirs. I'm trying to apply that." She looked at him. "You've been thinking about that all day," she said. "I've been thinking about a lot of things you said all day," he said. "You have a way of saying things that don't let you put them down afterward." She didn't know what to say to that. She looked down at her hands instead. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes. When all of this is finished," he said. "The FBI meeting, the case, the investigation. When it's done, and you go back to St. Matthew's and your apartment, and your 12-hour shifts." He paused. "Is there a version of that where you're not looking over your shoulder every time you go to your car?" She thought about it honestly. "Not immediately," she said. "Whoever sent that driver, the person who paid for my car to go off that highway, they're still out there. Until the case is complete, and the charges are filed, and everything is locked in. I'm still a witness to something people have significant motivation to keep contained." "I know," he said. "Is that what you were asking?" she said. "Not entirely," he said. She looked at him. "Then what were you asking?" He held her gaze. The controlled, measured expression he wore as a default was not entirely present right now. Something was showing through that he usually kept at a greater depth. "I was asking," he said slowly, "whether the version of your life after this has any room in it for—" He stopped. He seemed to be choosing words more carefully than usual, which was saying something. "For the complication of someone who owes you more than he's going to be able to properly account for." She looked at him for a long moment. You pulled me out of a car in the rain, she said. That's not— I know it's not what you mean, she said. But let me finish. She turned slightly to face him more fully, even though the movement cost her ribs something. You pulled me out of a car in the rain. And then you listened when I was afraid to trust you. And you let me tell you what I needed to tell you on my own timeline. And when you found out your brother had done something that would have destroyed a different person, you didn't blow the building down. You asked how to do it right. You asked how to protect the people who were still in danger before you dealt with everything else. She paused. Those aren't small things. I noticed them. I was very still. I'm not saying my history is irrelevant, he said. I know you're not, she said. And I'm not saying it is. I'm saying— She exhaled carefully. I'm saying that you asked if there was room. I'm telling you I noticed things. Those two statements can exist in the same space for a while without needing to be resolved tonight. The quiet between them was different from the other silences of the last 2 days. Not the silence of a crisis, or a calculation, or a grief being held at arm's length. Something more like the silence that existed when two people had been through something extreme together, and arrived at the far end of it, changed in ways they hadn't expected. For a while, he said. For a while, she confirmed. Dominic finished with Gideon Cross at midnight. The full record of what Cross gave them was comprehensive enough to make Reyes stop typing at one point and simply stare at his screen for a moment before continuing. The operation had touched more institutions than the 3 hospitals. It had moved more money than the financial routing had suggested. And the list of people who had paid Harlan Briggs for the witness information included 2 names that were going to land with significant force inside federal law enforcement when they surfaced. One of them was a deputy U.S. Marshal. Sophia heard that and sat very still. Someone inside the protection system, she said. Someone who had access to placement information, Dominic said. Cross doesn't know the full picture. He was operational, not strategic. But the payments align with the timing of when witness locations were compromised. That's why the operation worked, she said. They didn't just identify witnesses through the hospital intake. Someone inside the marshal's office was confirming placements, cross-referencing, making sure the information that came through the hospital system was accurate before it was sold. A double verification system, Alexander said. Which means my call to Carol tonight, Sophia said. Her throat tightened. Carol calling her contact at the marshals. I told her the witnesses' names. What if her contact— Call her back, Alexander said immediately. She was already dialing. Her hands were steady. She was a trauma nurse. Her hands were always steady, but the rest of her was not. Carol answered in 2 rings. The contact you called at the marshals, Sophia said. What's his name? A pause. Why? Please tell me his name, Carol. Agent Thomas Riley, Carol said. He's been my contact for 4 years. Why, Sophia? What Riley? She looked at Dominic. She mouthed the name. Dominic shook his head. The relief that moved through her was physical. It's okay, she said to Carol. I had to check something. Are the witnesses confirmed moved? I spoke to Riley 20 minutes ago, Carol said. Both are in transit to new locations. The original placements have been abandoned. Okay, Sophia said. Okay. There may be another name inside the marshals that surfaces tomorrow when we bring everything in. Riley needs to be the one to handle that internally, not anyone else. What name? Carol said. I'll bring it tomorrow, Sophia said. It's better with the full documentation in front of us. Carol, keep Riley close and keep this tight. I'll be there at 9. She ended the call. The room breathed. It's not Riley, she said. The witnesses are safe. Alexander exhaled. One short, controlled breath. Who is it? Dominic had already cross-referenced. He read out a name. We take that to the FBI tomorrow, Alexander said. Everything. Cross's testimony, the financial records, the routing, the hospital documentation, all of it, in the right order. And Harlan Briggs? Dominic asked. Briggs we give to them as well, Alexander said. Location, operation, everything. Let them move on him. Dominic looked at him. It was a careful look. You're giving them everything. Yes, Alexander said. Including things that will raise questions about our own operations, Dominic said. The financial routing runs through our legitimate structures as well. Investigators are going to look at everything that touches Romano Consolidated. I know, Alexander said. That's a significant exposure, Dominic said carefully. I know what it is, Alexander said. We give them everything anyway. We don't curate. We don't protect what we don't want them to find. We hand it over completely, and we let it land where it lands. Dominic said nothing for a moment. Then, okay. Sophia looked at Alexander. He met her eyes. You told me earlier, he said. There's a version where we do this right, and there's a version where we protect ourselves and the case falls apart. I choose the first version. That's going to cost you, she said. Some things should cost what they cost, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. In the half-light of the room, with the accumulated weight of the last 24 hours sitting on both of them, she saw something she hadn't expected to see in the face of a man who ran his world through fear and leverage and control. She saw someone choosing differently, not because it was strategic, not because the calculation favored it, but because someone had asked him at 5 in the morning over cold coffee whether he was going to be the thing everyone believed he was. And he had decided somewhere in the hours that followed that he was not. It was not a dramatic moment. It didn't look the way those moments looked in the stories people told afterward. It looked like a tired man in a difficult room saying, "We hand it over completely," in a voice that was quiet and final and entirely his own. But she had been in enough rooms at enough moments to know that the quiet final choices were the ones that actually changed things. The dramatic ones burned bright and disappeared. The quiet ones held. At 2 in the morning, the room had cleared enough that only she and Alexander remained awake. Dominic and Reyes had set up in adjacent spaces to monitor communications. Vincent was secured in a room at the back of the building, not restrained. He had agreed to cooperation, and Alexander had chosen to trust that agreement in the way you trusted a thing you had no reason to trust, except that you had decided to. Gideon Cross was being held more formally. Alexander came back from a brief phone call and sat down across from her. My attorney is aware, he said. Martin will be at the meeting tomorrow. He spent 45 minutes telling me this is the worst decision I have ever made. What did you tell him? She asked. That he might be right, and I was making it anyway, he said. She almost smiled. He's been with your family 30 years, and that's what you told him. He's been with me long enough to know I'm going to do what I decide to do, Alexander said. He just needs to hear himself object first. Is he good? He's the best attorney in the city, Alexander said. He's also furious with me, which means he'll be very motivated tomorrow. She nodded slowly. Her ribs had moved past the persistent ache of the previous hours into a deeper bone-level soreness that told her the inflammation was doing exactly what inflammation did. She was going to need proper rest before 9 in the morning. Real rest, not the 2 hours of lying awake she had managed the night before. Alexander, she said. Yes. Whatever happens tomorrow, she said. Whatever the FBI does with everything we bring them, I want you to know that what you did tonight mattered. Not strategically, not legally, the witnesses, the choice you made about how to do this. That mattered in a way that exists outside of what comes next. He looked at her with an expression she was still learning to read. You say things like that, he said, like you're not certain they'll land. I'm never certain, she said. But I say them anyway, because I think the people who should hear things don't hear them often enough. He was quiet for a moment. I have not, he said slowly, had very many people in my life who said what they meant without wanting something from the saying. I know, she said. I can tell. Is that the nurse in you? He said. Reading people. It's just paying attention, she said. Most people stop paying attention to people they've already formed a conclusion about. You got a conclusion formed about you very early and very loudly, and I think most people stopped looking after that. He looked at the table for a moment. What do you see, he said carefully, when you look? She considered the question honestly. She owed him honesty. He had given her enough of it in the last 24 hours that anything less would be a kind of theft. I see a man who has done real harm, she said. And who knows it. and who has been carrying that knowledge in a way that has made him harder and more controlled and more careful than he would have been otherwise. I see someone who set a line. The witnesses, the innocent people. The line you described to Vincent, and held it, and was genuinely betrayed when someone he trusted crossed it. I see someone who could have driven past a broken car on a highway in the rain and chose not to. She paused. And I see someone who is not the person his reputation says he is. Not entirely. Maybe not even mostly. I was very still. That's more grace than I've earned, he said. Maybe, she said. Or maybe grace isn't about earning. Maybe it's about accuracy. He looked at her. And the controlled surface of him, the layered, managed face he showed the world, was simply not present. What was there instead was something undefended and genuine and slightly undone. Get some rest, he said. His voice was rough at the edges. We have a long morning. I know, she said. She stood carefully, pressing her hand to her ribs. Alexander. He looked up. Thank you, she said, for stopping on a highway in the rain. He held her gaze for a moment. Thank you, he said quietly, for not letting me drive past. She walked to the room they had given her, and she lay down, and for the first time in 2 days, she slept. Not because everything was resolved, it wasn't. Not because the danger was entirely gone. It wasn't that either. But because the choice had been made. The right one. In the right way. And tomorrow, it was going to mean something. She woke at 6:47 and lay still for exactly 30 seconds, taking inventory. Ribs. Still bad, but manageable. The kind of pain that had settled into a predictable pattern rather than spiking with every breath. Head clearer than yesterday, the thick pressurized feeling behind her eyes significantly reduced. The cut above her eye was holding. She had slept 4 hours and 40 minutes, and it was the most consecutive sleep she'd had in 3 days, and her body had used every minute of it. She sat up slowly. She pressed her palm flat against her sternum, the way she had been doing since the crash, a small grounding gesture that she hadn't even noticed herself doing until Alexander had mentioned it yesterday. You do that, he had said. Press your hand there when you're steadying yourself. She hadn't known she did it. She got up. She got ready. She put on the second set of clothes that had been left for her. Someone in this organization had very good logistics, and she stood in the middle of the room for a moment and thought about what was waiting on the other side of the door. The FBI. Martin Holloway, Alexander's attorney. Carol and her contact agent Garrett. The full weight of everything they had assembled in the last 48 hours, sitting on a table in a federal building, while people who had the authority to act on it decided whether they would. And Alexander Romano walking into that room voluntarily. She breathed. She pressed her hand to her sternum. She walked out. Howe was already at the table. He had changed into a dark suit that fit with the precision of something made specifically for his body, and he was reading through a stack of documents his attorney had clearly sent over because Martin Holloway was sitting beside him, in the particular posture of a man who had spent the night preparing for the worst and intended to deliver the best. Martin was in his late 60s, silver-haired, with the kind of composed, watchful intelligence that came from 40 years of sitting across from people who wanted to destroy his clients. He looked at Sophia when she entered. He assessed her in the way experienced people assessed things quickly, thoroughly, without making it obvious. Ms. Bennett, he said, I've reviewed the documentation you produced. It's exceptional work. Thank you, she said. I want you to understand something before we go into this meeting, he said. The document trail you built and the clinical records you compiled are the backbone of this case. Your testimony is what makes them legible to investigators who don't have medical training. You are the most important person in that room today. Not my client, not Vincent's confession, not Gideon Cross's cooperation. You. She looked at him steadily. Is that your way of telling me to be careful? It's my way of telling you that people will try to move you off your account, he said. Investigators have their own theory of the case, and they will want the evidence to fit their theory rather than adjusting their theory to fit the evidence. Don't let them. Stay precise. Stay clinical. If something doesn't fit what you found, say so. I've given reports in federal cases before, she said. Expert testimony on injury patterns. Something in Martin's expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, but a recalibration. Good, he said. Then you know what I mean. Alexander looked up from his documents. He looked at her the way he had been looking at her since the night before, with something present in his face that hadn't been there before the conversation in the small hours of the morning. Something that wasn't managed. How are you? He asked. Ready, she said. That's not what I asked. I know, she said. But it's what I have right now. He accepted that. He nodded once and looked back at his documents. Martin watched this exchange with the careful attention of a man filing information. He said nothing. They left at 8:15. 2 vehicles again, but different. Martin had arranged private security through his own firm people, with no connection to Romano's organization, because arriving at a federal building with known Romano security would complicate things before the meeting started. Dominic stayed behind with Vincent. Reyes had transferred all digital files to a secure server that Carol's contact could access directly. In the car, Martin reviewed final points with Alexander in a low, rapid voice. Alexander listened without interrupting, which Sophia suspected was not always how he operated, but which was currently the correct call, and he knew it. She sat beside him and watched the city pass and thought about 14 federal investigations. About 3 prosecutions that had collapsed. About the 2 witnesses who had been moved in the night and were waking up somewhere new this morning, not knowing how close it had come. She thought about the deputy U.S. Marshal, whose name had surfaced in Gideon Cross's account. She thought about what it meant when the system that was supposed to protect people became the mechanism through which they were destroyed. She thought about what it meant to trust an institution. And then she thought about Alexander Romano, who had 20 years of reasons not to walk into a federal building walking into one anyway. Can I ask you something? She said quietly. Martin was still talking on his phone. Alexander turned slightly toward her. Are you afraid? She asked. He considered the question. She appreciated that he considered it, rather than reflexively dismissing it. Of the meeting, no, he said. Of what happens after, yes. A specific kind of afraid. The kind where you've made a choice that is the right choice, and you understand that right choices don't come with immunity from consequence. No, she said. They don't. But you make them anyway, he said. You make them anyway, she agreed. He looked at her for a moment. You've been making them since you stayed late in a documentation room 6 weeks ago. And before that, she said. Every shift, every patient, every moment where you could walk past something that isn't technically your responsibility, but you know it's wrong and you stop anyway. She paused. That's not heroism. That's just what you do when you've decided what you are. What have you decided you are? He asked. She thought about it. Someone who doesn't drive past broken cars, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. It was small. It was real. Carol was waiting outside the building with a man Sophia didn't know. Tall mid-40s with the particular brand of tiredness that came from an investigation that had been running too long without enough answers. This was Agent Garrett. He shook Sophia's hand and looked at her face, at the butterfly closures, at the careful way she was holding herself around the ribs, and his expression tightened. Ms. Bennett, he said, I've read your documentation, all of it. All of it in one night, she said. I didn't sleep, he said, simply, like it was obvious. He looked at Alexander. Something moved through his face, recognition, wariness. The professional calculation of a man deciding how to hold a complicated situation. Martin stepped slightly forward, not aggressively, just the positioning of someone establishing presence. Mr. Romano, Garrett said. Agent Garrett, Alexander said. His voice was neutral and steady. I want to be straightforward with you before we go inside, Garrett said. This meeting is about the witness compromise operation and the network behind it. The evidence you've provided is significant. Your cooperation in obtaining it is noted. What I cannot tell you, and what no one in that building can tell you, is what the implications are for your own organization's exposure. That's a separate process, and it's not one I control. I understand, Alexander said. You're walking in there without any guarantee, Garrett said. It wasn't a threat, it was information delivered plainly. "I know what I'm walking in without," Alexander said. "I'm walking in anyway." Garrett looked at him for a moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but something like respect, the grudging professional kind. "Then let's go," Garrett said. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Sophia had been in difficult rooms before. She had sat across from families and told them things that broke them. She had given testimony in malpractice cases and workers' compensation hearings, and once in a criminal trial involving a patient whose injuries she had documented. She knew how to be precise under pressure. She knew how to hold her ground when someone tried to move her off her account. But this was different in its scope and its weight, and the number of people in the room who had come in with their own theory of how everything connected and needed to be shown carefully and completely why that theory was incomplete. She gave her account in clinical order. The billing discrepancy that had been the accidental entry point, the injury patterns, the false patient identities, the administrative routing codes, the 3 evenings in the documentation room, the picture that had emerged piece by piece of a system designed to identify vulnerable people through their need for medical care. She was interrupted twice by an investigator named Chen, who wanted to redirect toward the financial structure. Both times she said calmly and precisely that the clinical evidence needed to be understood first, because it was the mechanism through which the financial structure operated, and without understanding the mechanism, the financial records were numbers without meaning. Chen accepted this the second time. The recording of Vincent's confession was played in full. The room was very quiet during it. She watched Garrett's face while it played, watched him hear Vincent say, "I don't track outcomes," and saw something move through his eyes that was not professional neutrality. It was human. It was the response of a person who had spent 7 months building a case around the edges of something monstrous, and had now heard the center of it speak in its own voice. When the recording ended, Garrett looked at Alexander. "Your brother," he said. "Yes," Alexander said. "He'll testify," Martin said. "Full cooperation in exchange for specific consideration on sentencing. The agreement is ready to review." "And Cross?" Garrett asked. "Same terms," Martin said. "He's given us the full operational structure, all buyer contacts, all transaction records. It's in the files you received this morning." Garrett looked at the documents in front of him. He looked at Sophia. He looked at Alexander. "The deputy marshal," he said. "The name Cross provided. Confirmed against payment records," Reyes's report noted in the files. "Transaction timestamps align with 3 witness location breaches." "That's going to require internal investigation before charges," Garrett said. "Delicate." "Riley handles it," Sophia said. "Carol's contact. He's clean. I confirmed that last night. He's the right person to run it internally." Garrett glanced at Carol, who nodded. "Harlan Briggs," Garrett said. "I have a location," Alexander said. He slid a document across the table. "Current as of midnight. He hasn't moved." Garrett looked at the document. He looked at Alexander with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously. "You're handing us Briggs," he said. "Everything," Alexander said. "Everything we have." "Including things that implicate your own structures," Garrett said. "Including those," Alexander said. The room was quiet for a moment. "Why?" Garrett asked. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question. The question of someone trying to understand a motive that didn't fit a familiar pattern. Alexander said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Because the people who were hurt by what ran under my name deserve more than a partial accounting." Garrett looked at him for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. He said 4 words to whoever answered, "Move on Briggs now." The moment the Briggs call was made, the meeting shifted. The temperature of the room changed. The investigators moved from assessment into action, which had its own rhythm and urgency, and the 4 of them, Sophia, Alexander, Martin, and Carol, were asked to wait in an adjacent room while decisions were made and calls were placed, and the machinery of federal law enforcement began turning on the information they had provided. Sophia sat down. She pressed her hand against her ribs. She exhaled. Carol sat beside her and didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, You look terrible. I feel better than I look, Sophia said. That's a very low bar, Carol said. I'm aware. Carol looked across the room at Alexander, who was standing with Martin going over documents in the quiet, concentrated way of two people making sure every detail was accounted for. He's not what I expected, Carol said quietly. No, Sophia said. He isn't. What is he? Carol asked. Sophia thought about the question for a moment. About all the versions of the answer she had encountered in the last 3 days, on an embankment in the rain, at a table at 6 in the morning, in a room with his brother in a car, at 2 in the morning, with the city moving past, and something undefended in his face. He's someone who made a decision, she said, and then made another one, and kept making them each one harder than the last. About this case, Carol asked. About who he is, Sophia said. What kind of man he's going to be from here. Carol was quiet for a moment. Then, are you going to be all right? Yes, Sophia said. I think I actually am. Garrett came back at 12:47. Briggs was in custody. The operation had been executed cleanly. Briggs at his office, 2 associates with him, all taken without incident. The buyer list recovered from his files added 7 additional names to the investigation. 3 of them in positions that were going to produce significant institutional consequences. And the deputy marshal, the name from Gideon Cross's account, had been placed on administrative leave pending internal investigation, with Riley overseeing the process personally. Garrett stood in the doorway and looked at the 4 of them. It holds, he said. The case holds. Everything you gave us, it builds. Sophia exhaled. The 2 witnesses, she asked. Both confirmed safe in new placements, Garrett said. Riley spoke with them this morning. They don't know the details yet of how close it came. They'll be told. She nodded. Garrett looked at Alexander. He stood in the doorway for a moment, with the expression of a man who was about to say something he hadn't said often. I can't tell you what's coming for your organization, he said. That investigation is separate, and it proceeds on its own logic. But I want you to know what you gave us today, the manner in which you gave it, without conditions, without negotiation. He paused. That's not something I've seen before, in 22 years. Alexander said nothing. It mattered, Garrett said. That's all. He left. Martin looked at Alexander. We need to talk, he said. It was the voice of an attorney who had 40 years of conversations like this one ahead of him and was already planning the first 10. I know, Alexander said. Tonight, Martin said. There's a significant amount of work to do. I know that too, Alexander said. He looked at Sophia. Can you give me a few minutes? Martin looked between them. He picked up his briefcase with the composure of a man who had navigated complicated situations for 4 decades and knew when to give people space. I'll be in the lobby, he said, and left. Carol stood. She squeezed Sophia's hand briefly, the gesture of someone who understood everything and was choosing to say none of it out loud, and followed Martin. The room was quiet. Alexander crossed to where she was sitting and sat down beside her. He didn't speak immediately. She had noticed this about him over the last 3 days, the way he let silences exist rather than filling them reflexively. It was a quality she had not expected in a man whose reputation was built on force. Garrett was right, she said. You need to know that. What you did today, the manner of it, that changes what comes next. Not legally, maybe, but it changes the shape of it. It changes what people see when they look. I didn't do it to change what people see, he said. I know, she said. That's exactly why it does. He looked at his hands for a moment. My attorney is about to have the hardest months of his career because of me, he said. Martin looks like he was built for hard months, she said. He was, Alexander said. He'd disagree with me calling it that. A pause. The organization is going to change. Whatever the investigation uncovers, and it will uncover things, the organization comes out of this different, smaller. Different in what it does. I've been thinking about that since last night. Is that frightening? She asked. Yes, he said. And no. He considered. It's the first time in a long time that I'm building something instead of maintaining something. She looked at him. You've already decided. I decided in that car, he said. When Garrett asked why I was handing everything over, I knew the answer before he asked. I've known since... He stopped. Since when? She asked. Since a woman with 2 cracked ribs sat across a table from me at 6 in the morning and said fear is a resource and I don't waste it on the wrong things, he said. And I thought I've been wasting mine for 20 years. She felt the weight of that. She let it land properly. What have you been afraid of? She asked. He looked at her directly. That there was no version of my life where I got to be something other than what I became, he said. That it was too late. That the damage was too deep, and the reputation was too fixed, and the momentum of it was going to carry me to the end of whatever this was, without me ever choosing a direction. And now, she asked. Now I'm choosing a direction, he said. The quietness between them was the kind that existed at the far end of something after the crisis had passed and the decisions had been made, and what remained was what was actually true underneath all of it. Alexander, she said. Yes. Whatever comes next, the investigation, the organization, Martin's hardest months. She looked at him steadily. You don't have to manage it alone. He looked at her. Something in his face moved through several things and arrived at something open. You said last night, he said, that the complication of me could exist in your life for a while without needing to be resolved. I did, she said. I need you to understand what the complication of me actually involves, he said. Not the surface of it, the actual weight of it, because you're precise about things and you deserve precision about this. Tell me, she said. It involves an organization in federal scrutiny, he said. A brother who is cooperating with prosecutors. A name that has 20 years of gravity attached to it. An attorney who is going to be on the phone at all hours. And a man who has never once in his adult life had someone sit across from him without wanting something from the interaction, and who is learning very slowly, very late, what it looks like when that isn't true. She listened to all of it. I know, she said. All of it. All of it, she said. I've been paying attention for 3 days. I know what the weight is. He was very still. And, he said, and I work 12-hour shifts in an emergency department, she said. I have held people together at their absolute worst. I have been in rooms where everything was broken and the only thing standing between a person and the end was someone who refused to leave. I know what weight looks like. I know how to be beside it without being crushed by it. She paused. And I know the difference between weight that comes from who a person is and weight that comes from what they've been through. Yours is the second kind. He looked at her for a long moment. You're not afraid of me, he said. I told you on the first morning, she said. Fear is a resource. I'm not wasting it on you. Something broke open in his face. It was not dramatic, it was quiet the way real things were quiet. The way a person's expression changed when they stopped bracing for something and found it wasn't coming. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. Carefully. The way someone held something they understood the value of. She let him. 3 months later, Sophia was standing in the emergency department at St. Matthew's when her phone buzzed. She was mid-shift 40 minutes from the end of it, and she had 2 patients still waiting and a colleague who needed help with a trauma bay consult. She looked at the message in the 10 seconds between one thing and the next. It was from Garrett. The message said, sentencing completed. Gideon Cross 11 years, Marco Caruso 9, Harlan Briggs 14, Deputy Marshal Soren 7, and then Vincent Romano 8 years reduced for full cooperation. Charges against Romano Consolidated Holdings resulted in dissolution of 3 sub-entities and significant financial penalties. No criminal charges filed against Alexander Romano. Case is closed. She read it twice. She put her phone in her pocket. She went back to her patient. At the end of her shift, she sat in the break room with cold coffee and read the message a 3rd time. She thought about the documentation room at 2 in the morning. She thought about the rain. She thought about the moment she had woken up trapped in a car that wasn't going to open and the way she had counted 30 seconds of fear and then started working the problem. She thought about a man stepping into headlights on an embankment and saying, "Look at me. Stay awake. You're not dying here. She was not dead. She was sitting in a break room with cold coffee in the hospital she had chosen to come back to because this was where she did what she did, and the fact that someone had tried to stop her from doing it did not change the fact that she had chosen it. She pulled out her phone and typed a reply to Garrett. "Thank you for telling me." Then she scrolled to a different name. She had been texting this name for 3 months, sometimes in the practical logistics of ongoing legal proceedings, sometimes in the small hours of the morning when neither of them was sleeping, sometimes in the middle of a shift when something happened that she needed to tell someone who would understand why it mattered. She typed, "It's done." Garrett just sent the sentencing. The reply came in 40 seconds. She knew he kept his phone close. The reply said, "I know." Martin called. "How are you?" She smiled. She typed, "I have cold coffee in 2 hours until I can go home." She paused. Then she added, "I'm good. I'm actually good." His reply, "I'll have better coffee when you get here." She put her phone down on the table. Outside the break room, the emergency department was doing what it always did, moving urgent, full of people at the worst moments of their lives who needed someone who wouldn't look away. She could hear the rhythm of it. She knew every sound. She was not the same person who had driven home on a rainy highway 3 months ago. She knew that. She had been changed by what she'd found and what she'd survived and what she had chosen to do with the thread once she'd found the end of it. She had been changed by what she'd seen in an unexpected man, and by what he'd seen in her, and by the way that seeing each other clearly, without pretense, without armor, without the comfort of a conclusion already formed, had produced something neither of them had been looking for. But the work was the same. The work had always been the same. You showed up. You paid attention. You refused to let go of the thing that mattered, even when letting go would have been easier. You held people together at their worst, and you told them the truth. Even when the truth was hard, and you stayed in the room when leaving would have been safer. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes the person who was supposed to be the danger turned out to be the person standing in the rain, reaching through broken glass, refusing to drive past. She finished her coffee. She stood up. She went back to work. Because that was who she was. That was who she had decided to be. And no one, not the person who had forced her car off a highway. Not the structures built to silence people who saw too much. Not the weight of a world that was often harder than it should have been, had managed to change that. Some people were shaped by what broke them. Sophia Bennett was shaped by what she chose to do after. And that was the only version of her story